The fantasy football playoffs are here, and I'm going to tell you why you should be dropping Todd Gurley. Welcome into another episode of Fantasy Dilemma. I'm your host, Nate Hamilton. You can follow me on Twitter at DominateFF. Let's talk about some adds and drops to help you win a fantasy championship. You should be adding Cole Beasley of the Buffalo Bills. Guys, he's having the best season of his career. Josh Allen is on fire, obviously, and he's targeting Cole Beasley a ton lately. The second half of the season, he's got a bunch of double-digit target games, and 3 of them have resulted in 100-plus yards in each of those games. Volume is king, and you're going to get a ton of that from Cole Beasley in the following weeks for the fantasy playoffs. At the running back position, it's Cam Akers time. Finally, the Rams are giving the majority of carries to the rookie in the last few weeks, and he looks like a tier above everyone else, especially in that game against the Patriots on Thursday night. He was explosive. He looked like the best guy on the field, and now he has over 300 yards rushing and 2 touchdowns in his last 3 games. He's the RB10 in the last 4 games played. So guys, add Cam Akers if you haven't already. Yes, I have a tight end for you to add this week. It's Dan Arnold from the Cardinals. Guys, Kyler Murray is targeting him a ton in the end zone, and he's caught 4 touchdowns now in his last 4 games. And if we want to be specific to fantasy playoffs, he's got an amazing matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles next week. So guys, add him at least for week 15. Moving on to who you should be dropping off your fantasy rosters, let's start at the wide receiver position. Jeudy of the Denver Broncos. He's still rostered in a ton of leagues, and honestly, I couldn't tell you why. He hasn't done anything in his last 4 games, and he only has 6 receptions in that time span, including a game where he didn't even catch a pass against the Saints. In half-point PPR leagues, he only has a double-digit game just once this season. That's all the way back in week 4. Guys, I think it's time we move on from Jeudy and get him off your fantasy rosters because he's not going to help you in the fantasy playoffs. At the running back position, it's time to drop Todd Gurley. Guys, this is not even a hot take. He hasn't done anything since the Falcons' bye week in week 10. In fact, he's only totaled 61 rushing yards since then. He only has 1 100-yard performance on the season. I mean, at this point, what are we even doing here in the fantasy playoffs? He had a favorable matchup in Week 14 against the Chargers and only totaled 19 rushing yards. I mean, you can't put him in the fantasy playoffs. If you do, you're not going to win. And finally, at the tight end position, it's another big name, Zach Ertz of the Philadelphia Eagles. He's still rostered in over half of fantasy leagues. And I'm still confused here because he hasn't done anything essentially all season for your fantasy teams. He's topped 42 receiving yards just once this season. And now Jalen Hurts is in at quarterback. It doesn't look like he's going to be targeting Ertz very much in the last couple weeks. He has minimal targets, and he hasn't turned it into anything. It appears the Eagles have moved on from Zach Ertz, and I think you should too. That's it for this episode of Fantasy Dilemma. Make sure you like, follow, and subscribe wherever you're watching this video. Comment, let us know who you plan on adding and dropping for the fantasy playoffs, and we'll talk to you next week.